I bet you have wondered about why viruses are not technically alive. It is a question that trips up a lot of people, and honestly, some of the answers you hear can make it even more confusing. You are told they cannot reproduce, but then you see them multiplying like crazy inside a host cell. What is the deal? Or that they do not have cells, but they clearly have structure. You hear they move and inject their DNA much like some living things. The worst answer might be that they are not alive because antibiotics do not work on them, which just adds to the confusion. Let us demystify viruses together really quickly. To understand this, we first need to get a common ground on what life actually is, scientifically speaking. It is not just about moving or multiplying. There is a checklist of fundamental properties that most biologists agree define a living organism. Think of it like a biological passport with several stamps required. First, and perhaps most crucially, all known living organisms are made of cells. A cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life, the smallest entity that can be considered alive. It is like the fundamental building block. From bacteria to blue whales, every living thing is cellular. Now, here is where viruses immediately diverge. They are not cells. They do not have a cytoplasm, organelles, or a cell membrane that performs the complex functions of a living cell. Instead, a virus is essentially just a package of genetic material, either DNA or RNA, wrapped in a protein coat. Next up is metabolism. Living organisms have incredibly complex internal machinery to take in nutrients, convert them into energy, and remove waste products. This constant chemical activity, the sum of all biochemical reactions, is how they grow, maintain themselves, and reproduce. It is their internal power plant. Viruses, however, have no such internal machinery. They do not eat, they do not generate their own energy, and they do not produce waste in the way a cell does. They are entirely dependent on a host cell for all their metabolic needs. They are literally energy parasites, completely inert outside of a living cell. The key is understanding this dependence. It leads directly into the next big point, reproduction. This is where a lot of the confusion comes in, because viruses definitely multiply, but it is not reproduction in the same sense that a cell divides or an animal gives birth. Living organisms reproduce to create offspring that are similar to themselves. This can be through asexual means, like a bacteria dividing in two, or sexually, involving the combination of genetic material from two parents. The organism itself carries out the reproductive process from within. Now, imagine a virus. It cannot just split in half or create another virus on its own. What it does instead is fascinatingly devious. It injects its genetic material into a host cell. Think of it as a tiny biological Trojan horse, sneaking its instructions inside the city walls of a living cell. Once inside, the viral genetic material hijacks the host cell's machinery. It essentially reprograms the cell, forcing it to stop its own functions and instead start producing viral components, more genetic material, more protein coats. It turns the cell into a dedicated virus factory. These newly manufactured viral parts then assemble themselves into complete new virus particles. Finally, these new viruses burst out of the host cell, often destroying it in the process, and go on to infect other cells. So, the virus does not reproduce itself. It directs a host cell to build copies of it. This addresses your point about how they inject DNA like a male reproductive process. While a loose similarity exists, the analogy breaks down quickly. Human reproduction involves two complex, metabolically active organisms creating a new organism that then grows. Viruses are entirely passive until they find a cell to exploit. Another characteristic of life is growth and development. Living organisms increase in size and complexity over time, following a specific genetic program. A sapling grows into a tree, a baby into an adult. This is an intrinsic process driven by their own cellular activity and energy. Viruses, on the other hand, do not grow or develop. A newly assembled virus particle is a complete, fully formed virus. It does not get bigger or more complex once it is made. It is either a functional virus or it is not. There is no maturation process in the way we see with living organisms. Homeostasis is the ability of an organism to maintain a stable internal environment despite external changes. Think of your body maintaining a consistent temperature or blood sugar level. It is about self-regulation, a constant balancing act to keep conditions optimal for life. Viruses possess no mechanisms for homeostasis. They are entirely at the mercy of their external environment and the internal environment of their host cell. Outside a host, they are essentially inert chemical compounds. There is no internal regulation to maintain any sort of stability. Living organisms also respond to stimuli. This could be a plant turning towards the sun, an animal reacting to danger, or even a single-celled organism moving towards nutrients. They detect changes in their environment and react in a coordinated, often self-preserving way, while viruses can attach to specific receptors on a host cell which might seem like a response. This is more like a lock-and-key mechanism than a complex adaptive reaction. They do not actively seek out hosts or react to threats in a way that demonstrates complex decision-making or self-preservation. Here is where it gets really interesting, and why some argue for their aliveness. Viruses absolutely evolve. They mutate rapidly, adapt to new hosts, and develop resistance, like we have seen with new variants. Evolution is a hallmark of life, and viruses clearly demonstrate it. However, evolution in isolation is not enough to grant them full alive status. Consider a crystal growing in a solution, or a complex chemical reaction evolving over time. While they change, they do not possess the other fundamental properties like cellular structure or independent metabolism. So, the overwhelming scientific consensus is that viruses are not alive. They are often described as obligate intracellular parasites. They exist in a strange limbo, on the edge of life, representing genetic material that has found a highly efficient way to persist and propagate by exploiting living systems. Now, about that bad answer regarding antibiotics. Antibiotics specifically target bacterial cells. They attack bacterial cell walls, ribosomes, or DNA replication processes, mechanisms unique to bacteria. Viruses do not have these structures, so antibiotics have no effect on them. That is why we have antivirals, which are entirely different. Antivirals target specific stages of the viral life cycle, like preventing the virus from attaching to a cell or inhibiting its ability to hijack the host's machinery. They do not kill viruses in the way antibiotics kill bacteria. Let us use an analogy. Think of a virus not as a living organism, but as a sophisticated computer program. It carries information, genetic code, and can replicate, but only if it is running on a computer. The host cell. The program itself is not alive, but it can certainly because a lot of chaos within a living system. Another way to picture it, a virus is like a highly complex recipe. It contains all the instructions to make a delicious cake. But the recipe itself is not a cake, nor can it bake itself. You need a baker, the host cell, and ingredients to bring that recipe to life and create more cakes. So, viruses blur the lines, but they do not cross the full threshold into what we generally accept as life. They do not possess independent agency or the full suite of self-sustaining capabilities found in even the simplest bacteria. They are incredibly successful biological machines. Understanding this distinction is not just a philosophical exercise. It fundamentally changes how we study them, how we develop treatments, and how we understand the very origins of life itself. It shows us how complex and diverse biological existence can be at its core. The core idea is that viruses are biological entities that possess genetic material and can evolve, but they lack the cellular structure, independent metabolism, and self-directed reproduction that are the cornerstones of all other known life forms. They are borrowed life, not self-sustained life. What I want you to walk away with is that while viruses are undeniably impactful and incredibly sophisticated, they represent a unique category, a highly effective information delivery system that exploits the aliveness of others. They are nature's ultimate repurposers of existing biological machinery.